A humble housekeeper discovered that her elderly employer was being poisoned inside his own mansion, and in a night of terror had to face a venomous snake that the millionaire son himself had sent to be placed in his father's room. From that moment on, dirty secrets about inheritance, betrayal, and greed came to light, and what was supposed to be a perfect crime turned into a divine turnaround in the life of someone no one respected. This is a story of courage, faith, and justice, in which a simple woman proves that the truth can bring down any powerful person. Prepare yourself, because this story will touch your heart and renew your faith. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. The old mansion in Buckhead, Atlanta, carried the scent of antique furniture and the heavy silence of one who had lived through better times. The Portuguese tile walls, faded by time, bore witness to decades of history that no one bothered to tell anymore. The one who held that silence, cleaning every corner with the same attention as someone praying, was Maria, 31 years old, with eyes too observant for someone who was only supposed to obey, and a voice so low that sometimes it seemed she wasn't speaking at all. She had come from the outskirts of Clayton County, from one of those towns where the red dust stubbornly clung to the houses even after the rain, and where working double shifts wasn't a virtue but a necessity. Accustomed to swallowing humiliation since she was a girl, when she first served coffee in a wealthy family's home and was told she didn't even know how to hold the cup properly, Maria had learned to lower her head. But she carried within her a contained courage, like an ember under ash, and an almost stubborn sense of justice that fought with the fear of speaking too loudly and losing everything. Faith was her foundation. It translated into small, constant gestures, like a glass of water offered without asking for anything in return, an old rosary in her apron pocket, touched so many times that the plastic beads were worn, and a firm hand on the forehead of anyone who was suffering, even if it was her employer. Old Arthur Montgomery, 78 years old, father of the millionaire Richard, was the only one in that house who called her by her full name. Maria Sanchez, he would say with a hoarse, slow voice, as if savoring each syllable. He was the only one who asked about her mother, Mrs. Rosa, who still lived in Clayton County and did laundry for others. "How is your mother, Maria? Has her leg gotten any better?" Simple questions like that, but they arrived like cool water on a hot day. Arthur was frail, walked with difficulty, leaning on a silver-handled cane that was older than he was. His legs trembled, his left knee no longer bent properly, and climbing stairs was a torture he disguised with weak jokes. For Maria, he had become a strange mix of employer and grandfather, the grandfather life had not allowed her to know. Her real grandfather had died before she was born, and her mother's stepfather had never wanted anything to do with her. Arthur, with his white hair combed back, his tired but attentive blue eyes, and that way of thanking her for every glass of water as if it were a blessing, occupied a space in her heart that was beautifully painful. But the fear of not being heard had haunted her since childhood, like a shadow that doesn't disappear even under the midday sun. She was only 9 when she reported her violent stepfather to the school's social worker. No one believed her. They said it was the behavior of a spoiled child, jealous of her mother. The social worker wrote everything down on a piece of paper and filed it away. The stepfather continued to beat her mother for another 3 years, until he disappeared one rainy night and never came back. Since then, the fear of confrontation mixed with the guilt of not having insisted more back. Then, what if she had shouted louder? What if she had sought out someone else? These questions returned on sleepless nights when the body's exhaustion wasn't enough to quiet her mind. Now, decades later, that same old fear was beginning to take shape again. Only now the risk seemed to be circling Arthur's room. It all started with small signs that only eyes trained for detail could perceive. Strange stains on the sheet, brown and irregular, as if something had been dragged across the fabric. Maria knew the difference between food, medicine, or dirt stains. This was nothing that usually appeared in a sick person's room. The old man's window, which was always kept closed by order of the nurse, Carla, would be found open in the early morning. Maria discovered this one cold June morning when she went up earlier to turn on the heater. The icy wind was blowing through the wide-open window, and Arthur was sleeping curled up under a thin blanket, shivering. She quickly closed the window, pulled a thick comforter from the closet, and carefully covered the old man, feeling anger rise warmly in her chest. Who would open a sick elderly man's window in the middle of the night? And there was the smell. A faint but unmistakable animal smell coming from the ceiling. It wasn't rats, which have a drier, more pungent smell. It was something different, something Maria couldn't identify. She knew the smell of pigeons, bats, possums. This was none of them. It came from the ceiling, especially from the part directly above Arthur's bed. When she stood on a chair and pressed her ear to the ceiling, she could hear a muffled sound, as if something were dragging itself slowly. She told the nurse, Carla, who laughed and said it was all in her head, that old houses always make noise. But Maria knew the difference between the noise of an old house and the noise of a living creature. Maria's two goals were simple to state, but enormous to carry: to keep Arthur's room truly safe, and to find out why his medications seemed to change color and shape. She didn't know anything about pharmacy, but she could recognize a pattern. The round white pill Arthur took every morning for his blood pressure sometimes appeared yellow and oval. The red capsule for his stomach occasionally came in blue. When she asked Carla, she was told that the pharmacy changed suppliers and that generic drugs were like that. But something didn't add up. Arthur complained of dizziness, tingling in his hands, and a weariness that didn't go away even with rest. Maria saw the confusion in his eyes and felt her stomach churn. The practical obstacle was the nurse, Carla, who controlled schedules, keys, and medications with an iron fist. A woman in her early 30s, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, nails always perfectly manicured, perfume too expensive for a nurse's salary. Carla arrived at 7 in the morning and left at 7 at night. But before leaving, she locked the medicine cabinet, locked the drawer with the prescriptions, and left everything organized in a way that no one could touch. If Maria entered the room to tidy up, Carla would watch her, sitting in the armchair next to the bed, scrolling on her phone but attentive to every movement. If Arthur asked for water, Carla would get it. If he wanted the window open, Carla decided whether it was time or not. The old man, tired of arguing, obeyed. The emotional obstacle was her own fear of losing her job and seeing Arthur suffer because of her. Maria earned $1,200 a month, working 6 days a week, from 7 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon. With that money, she paid her mother's rent, bought her diabetes medication, and sent a little to her younger brother who was studying at night and working during the day. Losing her job meant going back to looking for day worker positions, getting paid by the day, with no registration, no benefits, nothing guaranteed. And worse, it meant abandoning Arthur. Who would take care of him if she left? Who would pay attention to the details? The fear was so real that sometimes Maria would wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, dreaming that she was fired and that Arthur had died alone. But she was not one to give up easily. In her daily routine, Maria created a protection ritual that no one noticed. She would beat Arthur's mattress with the broom handle, shaking it hard to scare away anything that might be hidden in the folds of the fabric. She opened the windows at the same time every day right after breakfast, when the sun was high and the air had warmed up a bit, and closed them before 5 in the afternoon, when it started to get cold. She discreetly checked the old wooden box in the old man's closet, a rosewood box with a bronze lock where Arthur kept important documents. She didn't open it, just checked if it was still in the same place, if the dust around it was undisturbed. And she wrote everything down in an old notebook, with a blue hardcover, hidden behind the large pots in the kitchen. She wrote in neat handwriting, the same she had learned in school up to the 5th grade. June 10th, window open again, brown stain on the left side of the sheet, strong smell in the ceiling. June 12th, white pill changed, now it's yellow. Arthur complained of dizziness in the afternoon. Writing it down was a way of proving to herself that she wasn't crazy, that all of this was real. After finishing tidying the room on a cloudy afternoon, when the light turned grey and the silence of the house weighed even more heavily, Maria stopped beside Arthur's bed. The old man slept with, his mouth slightly open, breathing with difficulty, his chest rising and falling in a tired rhythm. His hands, full of age spots and bulging veins, rested on the blanket like 2 dry leaves. Maria felt a tightness in her chest, a mixture of love and fear, and slowly made the sign of the cross, touching her forehead, chest and shoulders, as her mother had taught her. She leaned in a little, so her voice wouldn't wake the old man, and murmured in a prayer that was both a promise and a plea. God, see what we cannot prove. The words came out quietly but firmly, carrying the weight of someone who had prayed for justice so many times and never received a quick answer. But Maria knew that God's answer didn't always come in the way one expected. Sometimes it came in the form of courage, sometimes in the form of evidence, and she was willing to wait as long as it wasn't too late. The next day the sun streamed through the mansion's marble veranda with that strong mid-morning light, making the Portuguese tiles shine and catching reflections from the crystal chandeliers that no one had properly cleaned in years. Maria was mopping the hallway, trying not to make noise, while the sound of imported cars at the gate drowned out the voices of those serving coffee. They were always expensive, gleaming cars that came and went, bringing and taking important people who didn't look at her. Richard, Arthur's son, had passed through the kitchen without greeting anyone, just grabbing a cup of coffee that Betty had left ready and returning to his office with his phone to his ear. Maria heard him talking loudly on speakerphone, that deep, impatient voice of someone used to giving orders. "No, I can't wait until next week. I need to close this deal now. An investment in Dubai doesn't wait, partner." He spoke of figures Maria couldn't even pronounce, of trips to Europe, of events in Chicago, while she crossed the hallway with the bucket in her hands, silently counting each step to Arthur's room. It was 23 steps from the kitchen to his door. She knew it by heart. When she entered the room, the first thing she did was open the thick, wine-colored velvet curtain, letting the sunlight in to chase away the cold gloom that filled the space. Arthur was still asleep, but his sleep was restless, agitated, as if he were running from something in a dream. Maria began to tidy up, folding the blanket that had fallen on the floor, arranging the slippers beside the bed, collecting the empty water glass. It was then that she again noticed that slight noise coming from the ceiling, like something alive being dragged, something moving slowly, but with weight. The sound came from above the headboard. She stopped, holding the glass in her hand, and listened. It was a muffled, irregular sound, followed by a silence, and then another. Movement. Her heart sped up. She looked at the ceiling, at the dark wood paneling, searching for a crack, a sign. Nothing. But the smell was stronger, that strange animal smell, half sweet, half rotten, that stuck in her nose. As she pulled the sheet off the bed to change it, she saw something that made her freeze for a moment. A thin trail of fresh dirt at the foot of the bed, on the right side, right where the window overlooking the garden was. Red, damp earth, as if it had been brought in from outside a short time. Tago. Maria bent down, ran her finger through the dirt, felt its wet texture. She looked at the window. It was closed now, but the latch on the inside was loose, as if someone had closed it in a hurry and forgotten to lock it properly. The cause seemed too simple to be innocent. Someone had opened that window during the night, someone who had access to the room, someone who knew that Arthur slept heavily because of the medication. But why? To let what in? She put the dirty sheet in the basket and went down to the kitchen, her heart beating faster than it should. Betty was preparing lunch, chopping an onion on an old wooden board, her eyes watering but her hands steady. Betty was in her early 50s, with grey hair in a low bun, an apron stained with tomato sauce, and that motherly air of someone who had raised 5 children on her own. She had worked there for 15 years, since before Richard married Lydia, since when the house still had life and the laughter of children. Maria trusted her more than anyone else in that mansion. "Betty, did you see anyone messing with Mr. Arthur's window last night?" Maria asked quietly, while getting a glass of water from the refrigerator. Betty stopped chopping the onion and looked at her with those tired but attentive eyes. "Why are you asking that, child?" "Because there's dirt on his floor and the window is being opened at night. It's not normal, Betty, and the smell— Don't you smell that strange smell upstairs?" Betty wiped her hands on her apron and lowered her voice even more, looking down the hallway to make sure they were alone. "I don't go in there much, Maria. Carla won't let me. But I overheard a strange conversation yesterday in the office. Richard was talking to someone on the phone about a plan that couldn't go wrong. I didn't understand it all, but his voice was different. Nervous. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. She stored the information in her head as she did with everything, and thanked her with a nod. It was as she crossed the hallway, back to Arthur's room, that Maria saw the gardener, Frank. He was coming from the back garden, carrying a cardboard box with small holes in the sides. The box was the size of a shoebox but deeper, and Frank was holding it carefully as if the contents were fragile or dangerous. When he saw Maria, he looked away too quickly, speeding up towards the tool shed near the garage. Maria knew that gesture. It was the gesture of someone with something to hide. Frank was a young man in his early 20s, thin with a tattoo on his arm and his cap always on backward. He had worked there for about 6 months, always quiet, always doing his job without complaining. But now, with that box in his hands and that nervous manner, he seemed like a different person. "Frank, what's that?" Maria asked, trying to sound casual but feeling the tension in the air. "Nothing, Miss Maria. Just some seedlings Mr. Richard told me to plant in the back." His voice came out rushed, jumbled. "Seedlings with holes in the box?" He didn't answer, just nodded and went into the shed, closing the door behind him. Maria stood there, in the middle of the garden, feeling the hot sun on her back and the cold fear in her chest. Seedlings didn't need holes in the sides. Seedlings weren't carried with such care. But animals were. Animals needed to breathe. Later, when she went to collect the trash from the hallway to take to the gate, Maria found something that made everything start to fit together. Among crumpled papers, an empty medicine package, and food scraps, there was a crumpled receipt, torn in half but still legible. The letterhead read, "Exotic Animal Center, Atlanta," and below, written in blue pen, was the name Richard Montgomery. The receipt was from 3 weeks ago and described the purchase of 1 adult specimen for controlled handling, but it didn't specify what kind of animal. The price was high, $1,500. Maria carefully folded the receipt and put it in her apron pocket, feeling her hands tremble. Every detail was fitting into a picture that was starting to become terrifying. Frank's box, the open window, the fresh dirt, the animal smell from the ceiling, and now, proof that Richard had bought some kind of exotic animal. She went back to the kitchen and found Betty sitting on a stool, drinking coffee and looking out the window with that tired expression of someone who has seen too much in life. When she saw Maria come in, Betty immediately knew something was wrong. She knew that look. "What is it, child? You're as white as a sheet." Maria pulled up a chair, sat beside her, and in a low voice told her everything. The dirt, the window, Frank's box, the pet shop receipt. Betty listened in silence, stirring her coffee slowly, her eyes growing more and more serious. "Maria, this is dangerous. If you're right, if Richard is plotting something against his father, we're talking about people with money, with lawyers, with power. We're just housekeepers. Who's going to believe us?" "I know, Betty, but I can't pretend I don't see it. Mr. Arthur is a good man. He doesn't deserve this." Betty sighed deeply, placed her cup in the sink, and looked at Maria with a mixture of fear and determination. "All right, I'll help you, but we have to be smart." She paused, thinking. "My brother Sebastian works as a nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital. He understands medicine, these things. If you can get a sample of the pills Mr. Arthur is taking, he can analyze them, see if there's something wrong." Maria nodded, feeling a sense of relief mixed with even more fear. She was no longer alone, but now the weight of responsibility was even greater. She needed to keep her job to help her brother, the nurse at the public hospital, but she couldn't stand the thought of seeing old Arthur in danger. It was too fine a line to walk. Mr. Neville, the doorman, was another potential ally. A man in his 60s, retired from construction. He had worked there for 10 years as the mansion's doorman. He knew everyone's comings and goings, memorizing schedules, license plates, faces. He had a small black notebook where he wrote everything down. Who arrived, who left, what time. Maria knew he didn't like Richard, finding his employer arrogant and ungrateful. But Neville was discreet, careful. He would agree to talk, as long as it didn't seem like employee gossip. Maria approached him late in the afternoon as he was changing the water in the plants at the gatehouse. "Mr. Neville, can I ask you a question?" "You can, Maria. Go ahead." "Have you seen anyone strange coming in here in the last few weeks? Someone different, not a regular visitor?" Neville stroked his grey beard, thoughtful. "I have. About 2 weeks ago, a man in a pickup truck came by with a pet shop sticker on the door. He asked for Frank and spent about 20 minutes back there, talking with him in the back. Then he left." "Why?" "Just curious," Maria lied, but her heart pounded. Another piece of the puzzle. The wealthy family's motivations were also clear to anyone who paid attention. Richard complained loudly, whenever he thought no one important was listening, about his father's spending on donations to the church, to an orphanage, to the daycare in the poor neighborhood where he grew up. "My father is throwing money away on these people," he would say to Lydia, his wife. "And now he wants to sell part of the company to create a foundation. He's senile. I'm going to have to take action." Maria heard these things as she mopped the hallway, as she collected cups, as she pretended to be invisible. And she stored it all in her memory. Lydia, Richard's wife, was a woman of about 45, with salon blonde hair, excessively thin, always in designer clothes and high heels, even at home. She feared losing her standard of living if her father-in-law changed the will. She constantly talked about trips, jewelry, renovations to their beach house. The idea of Arthur selling part of the company and donating the money to charity made her desperate. "If he does that, we'll have to cut costs," she complained to her husband. "I wasn't born to live like a poor person." It was on a Thursday afternoon while Maria was cleaning the second-floor bathroom that she gathered the courage to speak up. Lydia was in her room, trying on new shoes that had just arrived. Maria knocked on the door, entered slowly, and in a low voice tried to hint at her concern. "Mrs. Lydia, excuse me, I wanted to talk about the security in Mr. Arthur's room." Lydia looked up, surprised, as if she had forgotten Maria could speak. "Security? What are you talking about?" "It's just that I've been noticing strange things. The window open at night, dirt on the floor, noise in the ceiling." Lydia let out a cold, dry laugh, devoid of any humor. It was a laugh of contempt. "Maria, you're seeing things where there are none. Old houses make noise, windows open with the wind. You should be more concerned with doing your job properly and less with making up stories." "But Mrs. Lydia, I just—" "Enough." Lydia's voice cut through the air like a razor. "I don't want to hear any more of this. And since you have so much free time to invent problems, starting today you'll be cleaning 3 more bathrooms, and this is a direct order. I don't want you entering my father-in-law's room after 8 at night. Carla takes care of him. You take care of the cleaning. Understood?" Maria lowered her head, feeling the humiliation burn her face. It was always like this. Always. Her voice didn't matter. Her concern was worthless. She was just the housekeeper, just the woman who cleaned toilets. "Understood," Lydia repeated louder. "Yes, ma'am," Maria murmured, leaving the room with shaky legs and eyes stinging with restrained anger. But even with the humiliation, even with the fear, Maria did not give up. That afternoon, before leaving, she returned to the notebook hidden behind the pots and wrote everything down in a firm, neat hand. The smell from the ceiling, Frank's box with holes, the pet shop receipt with Richard's name, the conversation with Neville about the man in the pickup truck. Each small discovery was accompanied by a deep exhaustion, a pain in her right shoulder from carrying heavy buckets, and a growing sense of danger that no one seemed to want to name. But she would name it. She would prove it, whatever it cost. The figure of Richard, always impeccable in light Italian linen shirts and expensive watches that gleamed on his wrist like a promise of success, began to reveal itself to Maria beyond the facade of a smile he used for visitors and clients. She saw him every day crossing the house with long, hurried strides, his phone always glued to his ear, his brow furrowed with worry. In phone arguments which he didn't bother to hide from those serving coffee or mopping the floor, Richard spoke of hidden debts, a risky investment in Dubai that couldn't go wrong, deadlines that were approaching, and creditors who were starting to call. "I need liquidity now, not in 6 months," he would shout into the phone, pacing back and forth in his office. "If this deal doesn't go through, I lose everything, everything." For Richard, his father was both a source of pride and an obstacle. Arthur Montgomery had been a respected businessman who had built an import-export company from scratch, working day and night for 30 years until he turned a rented warehouse into a conglomerate with offices in 3 countries. Richard had inherited the management 10 years ago when his father began to have health problems and decided to step back. But unlike his father, who had a long-term vision and strict business ethics, Richard gambled on quick profits, on shortcuts, on deals that seemed too good to be true, and some of them really were. Now suffocated by debts and promises he couldn't keep, he looked at his father with a mixture of resentment and desperation, because Arthur, even sick, even old, still owned 50% of the company's shares, and he had decided to sell part of that control. Arthur's decision was clear and irrevocable. He wanted to sell 20% of his shares in an international deal already being negotiated with a European company, and direct the money to 2 projects he considered his true legacy. The first was a charitable foundation that would bear his name and work on the education of low-income youth. The second was a nursing home in the sweet Auburn neighborhood, where he had grown up, where his mother had done laundry for others and his father had worked as a carpenter. Arthur spoke of these plans with his eyes shining, his voice thick with emotion, as if he were finally doing what he was born to do. "I've made too much money in my life, Maria," he would say to her when they were alone in the room. "There comes a time when you realize that hoarded money is useless. It has to circulate. It has to help." But for Richard, this decision was a death sentence. Selling 20% of the shares meant losing strategic control of the company. It meant the European partners would have a say in decisions. It meant, above all, that the money he was counting on to cover his debts and save his risky investments would simply disappear, donated to charity. Richard saw this as the risk of everything he had built collapsing, and with it, the collapse of his marriage to Lydia, who was already threatening to file for divorce if her standard of living dropped. "I didn't marry you to live on a tight budget," she would say in arguments Maria overheard from the hallway. "If your father goes through with this madness, I'm leaving, and I'm taking half of everything." The nurse, Carla, in her early 30s, with brown hair always tied back, a tired look but steady hands, had become a functional accomplice in this plot, out of sheer desperation. Maria discovered this gradually, piecing together fragments of conversations, observing gestures, noticing contradictions. Carla wasn't a bad person. She was just a person too broken to resist temptation. A widow for 3 years, she was raising her teenage son, a 15-year-old boy named Raphael, who attended an expensive private school, because his mother wanted him to have opportunities she never had. But the school's tuition consumed almost half of her salary. The rest went to rent, electricity, groceries, and the boy's asthma medication. When Richard approached her one Friday afternoon, offering $5,000 to adjust his father's medication and turn a blind eye to a few things, Carla thought of the school bill due on Monday. She thought of the overdue bills. She thought of her son's face when she told him she couldn't afford the English course he so badly wanted to take, and she accepted. But what Richard told her was that the idea was just to scare the old man so he'd be more obedient, to swap some medications for placebos, to make Arthur feel more confused, more dependent, more willing to sign whatever his son put in front of him. Carla believed it because she wanted to believe it, because $5,000 seemed like salvation, because Richard swore he wouldn't do anything to truly hurt his father, and she, desperate, chose to believe. It was on a rainy Friday night, with the sound of the rain beating hard against the windows and the wind howling in the cracks of the old house, that Maria heard something that made her freeze. She was finishing putting away the pots in the kitchen, almost time to leave, when she heard Arthur's voice coming from his room, weak but frightened. "Maria! Maria, come here." She dropped everything and ran upstairs, her heart pounding. She found the old man sitting up in bed, pale, trembling, his eyes wide with fear. "There's something moving on the floor," he murmured, pointing to a dark corner of the room. "I swear I felt it. It passed by my foot." Maria turned on. All the lights looked under the bed, behind the wardrobe, inside the bathroom. Nothing. But when she bent down to look under the dresser, She saw that thin trail of fresh dirt again, as if something had been dragged from one side to the other. And the smell. That animal smell was stronger, almost unbearable. She helped Arthur lie back down, covered him carefully, gave him water, and held his trembling hand until the old man calmed down. But before she left, she went to check the medications. The pills were on the tray beside the bed, organized in plastic. Cups by time, morning, afternoon, night. Maria picked up the nighttime cup and looked closely. The pills were different from the ones she had seen Arthur take for months. The small, round white pill for blood pressure was now oval and yellowish. The red capsule for his stomach was blue. Maria didn't know anything about pharmacy, but she knew this wasn't right. She put 2 pills in her apron pocket, wrapped in a small piece of paper towel, and ran down to the kitchen to show Betty. But before she could open her mouth, she heard Lydia's sharp voice coming from the living room, calling her name. "Maria, get in here now!" The tone was one of command, of anger. Maria wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath, and went. She found Lydia standing in the middle of the living room, her face red with rage, holding a small velvet box in her hand. Beside her, Richard with his arms crossed. At the door, Mr. Neville and Frank called to serve as witnesses. "You stole my gold bracelet," Lydia accused, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "A bracelet is missing from my jewelry box, and you were the last person to clean my room." Maria felt the floor disappear from under her feet. The humiliation burned her face like a slap. "I didn't steal anything, Mrs. Lydia. I would never—" "Don't give me that," Lydia shouted. "I've been suspicious of you ever since you started making up these stories about my father-in-law's room. Now I know what you are. A thief. A liar." Maria looked at Richard, searching for some trace of justice, some sign that he would defend the truth. But Richard just looked away, indifferent. She looked at Neville, who lowered his head, embarrassed. At Frank, who also said nothing. The humiliation in front of them, in front of people she knew, who worked with her, who knew she was honest, was devastating. Maria thought about quitting right then and there. She thought about screaming, crying, defending herself. But her voice wouldn't come out. The fear of repeating the past, of seeing an injustice and being unable to prove it, weighed on her chest like a stone. It was Betty who appeared at the kitchen door, trembling, her hands clutching her apron. "Mrs. Lydia, you can't accuse Maria without proof. She's an honest person. She's never taken anything from anyone." "You stay out of this, Betty," Richard cut in, his voice harsh. "This is none of your business." But Betty didn't back down. "If the bracelet is missing, look for it properly, but don't accuse someone who's innocent." Lydia snorted, irritated, but didn't press the issue. She dismissed everyone with an impatient gesture. Maria left the room with her head down, her eyes burning with unshed tears, her heart broken. She went up to her room, a small room at the back of the house, and cried until she had no tears left. She cried for the humiliation, for the injustice, for the fear of losing everything. But mostly she cried because she knew this wasn't an accident. It was a strategy. Richard and Lydia wanted to discredit her, wanted no one to take her suspicions seriously, and they had almost succeeded. But Betty didn't give up. That same night, she knocked on the door of Maria's small room and came in, bringing a cup of hot tea and a tight hug. They sat together on the narrow bed, and Betty confessed what she had been holding back. "My brother, Sebastian, works at Grady Memorial Hospital. He can help us figure out these medications. If you can get a sample to him, he'll analyze it. We'll find out what's happening." Maria wiped her tears, took out the 2 pills she had saved in her pocket, and showed them to Betty. "I took these today, from Mr. Arthur's cup." Betty took the pills carefully, wrapped them in a clean napkin, and put them in her purse. "I'll take them to him tomorrow morning. We're going to find out the truth, Maria, I promise." The next day, while collecting the trash from the hallway, Maria found another piece of the puzzle. Among torn papers, food scraps, and empty packaging, there was a duplicate copy of another receipt from the Exotic Animal Center. This one was more recent, from 2 weeks ago, and bore Richard Montgomery's signature at the bottom. But what made Maria's blood run cold was the description of the item purchased: one adult specimen of a venomous snake from rural Georgia for controlled handling purposes. The price was even higher than the first receipt, $2,000, and in the bottom corner a handwritten note, "Night delivery, as arranged." Maria held the receipt. With trembling hands, feeling fear and anger grow at the same time. Nothing was a coincidence. Frank's box with holes, the animal smell from the ceiling, the window open at night, the fresh dirt on the floor. It all fit into a plot so cruel, so calculated, that it hurt to believe a son could do that to his own father. And worse, the mansion's security cameras had been under maintenance for weeks by Richard's own order. Mr. Neville had mentioned this days ago, complaining that he could no longer check the footage to see who was coming and going. "Mr. Richard said he's going to call a technician, but it's been over a month and nothing," the doorman had said. Maria folded the receipt carefully, put it in her pocket with the notebook, and went back to her room to write everything down. As she noted each detail in her neat, firm handwriting, she felt the weight of the limitations she had always carried. Little schooling, only up to the 5th grade. A fear of the police because poor people of color learn from an early age to fear the law rather than trust it. A fear of being seen as the rebellious housekeeper, the crazy woman who invents stories to get attention. All these fears screamed inside her, telling her to give up, to stay quiet, to accept that it was none of her business. But there was something stronger. The memory of Arthur's face, pale with fear, murmuring that he felt something moving on the floor. The memory of his trembling hands holding the rosary. The memory of his hoarse voice saying, "How is your mother, Maria?" She closed the notebook, hid it behind the pots, took a deep breath and looked out the kitchen window. Night was falling heavily over Buckhead, with the city lights twinkling below and the cold wind announcing a storm. Maria knew that each step towards the truth increased the danger. She knew she could lose her job, her references, the chance to help her mother and brother. But she also knew she couldn't live with a guilty conscience if she did nothing. She touched the rosary in her pocket, closed her eyes, and murmured softly, "God, give me the strength not to give up, because I can't leave him alone." And she decided to press on, whatever it cost the following. Night fell heavily on the affluent neighborhood of Buckhead, bringing with it a different kind of silence, the kind that seems to herald a storm. The distant sound of motorcycles on the avenue rose from the valley like a constant murmur, and the wind beat against the tall trees in the garden, making the leaves dance in a restless rhythm. Inside the mansion, the gleam of the crystal chandeliers in the main hallway contrasted with the darkness that enveloped the second floor, especially the corridor leading to Arthur's room. Lydia's order was crystal clear, repeated in front of everyone that, "Morning. No one is to be walking around up here after 8 at night. Mr. Arthur needs peace and quiet. Anyone who disobeys is fired on the spot." Carla, the nurse, seemed far too calm that night. Maria watched her go upstairs at 7:30, carrying the tray with Arthur's evening medications and a glass of orange juice. She had checked the grandfather clock in the kitchen, an old clock that marked the hours with a constant tick-tock, and turned up the volume on the television in the old man's room before coming down. The sound of a game show with canned laughter and loud music leaked through the ajar door. Carla descended the stairs with light steps, grabbed her purse from the kitchen, waved at Maria with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and left. "Good night, Maria. See you tomorrow." Her voice came out mechanical, rehearsed. Maria was finishing putting away the pots in the kitchen, drying the last large cast-iron skillet that Betty had used to make steak and onions for lunch. The smell of sautéed onions still lingered in the air, mixed with the aroma of old coffee and coconut detergent. Her hands were tired, her fingers wrinkled from so much time in soapy water, and her right shoulder ached in that familiar way that signaled rain. But even tired, even sore, Maria couldn't relax. Something about tonight was wrong. She could feel it on her skin, in the shiver that ran up the back of her neck, in the tightness in her chest that wouldn't go away. That's when she heard it. A muffled sound from upstairs. It wasn't the sound of the television. It was different. A heavy, dragging sound, followed by a tense silence and then another movement. It was coming from Arthur's room. Maria dropped the skillet in the sink, quickly dried her hands on her apron, and stood still, listening. Her heart began to beat faster. Then came another sound, clearer, a muffled, weak groan, like someone trying to scream, but failing. With her rosary in hand, hastily pulled from her apron pocket, and with the long-handled broom that stood against the kitchen wall as a makeshift support and weapon, Maria climbed the stairs, treading lightly, avoiding the steps that creaked. There were 19 steps to the second floor. She knew by heart which ones made noise. She skipped the 5th, the 9th and the 13th. The hallway light was off. Only the faint glow from the window at the far end illuminated the path. As she approached the door to Arthur's room, which was ajar, she heard that dragging noise again, now closer, followed by a strong hissing sound, like air escaping through a narrow hole. And then Arthur's groan, low, frightened, full of fear. Pushing the door open slowly, her heart pounding so loud it felt like it would burst from her chest, Maria saw the scene her heart had seemed to foresee for days. On the light snow-white sheet, a thick dark snake, with inverted V-shaped markings on its back, was coiled near Arthur's legs. Its body, sleek and heavy, moved slowly, sinuously, slithering up the sheet toward the old man's chest. Arthur was awake, his eyes wide with terror, his body completely still, only his chest rising and falling in short, desperate breaths. He tried to move but couldn't. Fear had paralyzed him completely. His mouth opened, trying to form words, but only a hoarse whisper escaped. "Maria, help me." Fear almost paralyzed Maria too. She had never seen a snake up close, only from a distance, crossing a dirt road in Clayton County. But her attention to detail, the same attention that made her notice dirt on the floor and a smell in the ceiling, spoke louder than fear. She remembered the old wooden box in Arthur's closet, the rosewood box with a bronze lock where he kept important documents. She remembered the sheets always folded the same way, the corners tucked under the mattress with military precision, just as Arthur liked. If she pulled the sheet by the corners, carefully, without sudden movements, maybe she could guide the snake away from the old man's body. "Mr. Arthur, stay still," Maria whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "Don't move anything, don't even take a deep breath, just stay still." Arthur blinked once, slowly, in agreement. Tears streamed down his wrinkled face, wetting the pillow. Maria approached the bed with slow steps, holding the broom in one hand and the rosary in the other. She placed the broom on the floor, very slowly, and with both hands free, she grabbed the corners of the sheet at the bottom by Arthur's feet. The snake continued to climb, now near his knee. Maria pulled the sheet with firm but controlled movements, sliding the fabric under the animal's body. The snake stopped, raised its triangular head, its forked tongue flicking in and out rapidly, tasting the air. Maria felt sweat run down her back, soaking her blouse. She kept pulling, slowly, guiding the snake toward the edge of the bed. With a final, quicker movement, she yanked the sheet all at once, and the snake fell to the floor with a dull thud. Immediately, Maria grabbed the broom and, using it as an extension of her hands, began to push the animal away from the bed, toward the corner of the room where the wardrobe stood. The snake moved quickly, sinuously, trying to get back under the bed, but Maria blocked its path with the broom handle. In a surge of desperation, of pure adrenaline and courage born from fear, she kicked open the wardrobe door, pulled down the old rosewood box from the top shelf, emptied it onto the floor with a sharp movement, scattering old papers and yellowed envelopes, and placed the open box on the floor in front of the snake. The snake, confused, trying to escape the broom, slithered into the box. Maria, her knees trembling, slammed. The lid shut and held it down with the weight of her own body, sitting on top of the box. Her heart was beating so hard it hurt. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely hold the rosary. But she had done it. She had trapped the snake. It was only then that she noticed what she had scattered on the floor: old envelopes with law firm letterheads, folded papers with official stamps, and a multi-page document with a lawyer's typeface, blue ink, a bolded heading. She picked up the document still sitting on the box and read. The title, Last Will and Testament Updated Version, in the name of Arthur Montgomery. She quickly flipped through it, even without understanding all the legalese, but a few words jumped out at her. Arthur Montgomery Charitable Foundation. 20% of shares designated for sale to fund the foundation, nursing home in the Sweet Auburn neighborhood. As she touched the lid of the box, Maria noticed something she hadn't seen before. A recent mark, a small sticker on the top right corner. She leaned her face closer to see better in the dim light of the room. It was the same sticker that was on the receipts she had found in the trash. The logo of the Exotic Animal Center, with a stylized drawing of a snake coiled around a tree. The sound of the box moving, of the snake hitting against the wooden walls inside, attracted people. Hurried footsteps on the stairs, loud voices. Carla appeared first, breathless, her hair down and disheveled, as if she had run back. Behind her, Richard, in a silk robe over his dress shirt, his eyes wide with shock. And finally Lydia, in an expensive nightgown and feathered slippers, her face without makeup, showing her true age. "What's going on here?" Richard shouted, but his voice came out less authoritarian and more frightened. Maria stood up from the box, holding it firmly with both hands, and faced him. "There's a snake in here, a venomous snake that was on top of your father." Her voice came out hoarse but steady. "And this box has the sticker from the pet shop where you bought it." Richard turned pale. He tried to cover it up, forcing a nervous smile. "This is crazy. It must be an animal from the garden. This house is near a wooded area. It's normal for snakes to get in." "Snakes from the garden don't come in pet shop boxes," Maria replied, pointing to the sticker. "And they don't just happen to appear in your father's room on the night Mrs. Carla leaves the window open and goes home early." Carla took a step back, trembling. I didn't know it would be like this. Richard said it was just to scare him, to make his father sign some papers." "Shut up!" Richard yelled, turning on her angrily. But it was too late. The confession was out. Arthur, still lying in bed, tried to sit up. Maria dropped the box on the floor, ran to him and helped him. Only then did she see the red mark on the old man's right leg, just above the ankle. 2 small marks, like 2 close-set pinpricks. The skin around it was already swollen, reddish. Arthur's breathing was becoming more and more labored, his face too pale, his lips turning a bluish hue. "He's been bitten," Maria said, feeling panic rise. "We need to call an ambulance now." She grabbed the landline phone on the nightstand and started dialing 911. Before she could finish, Richard lunged forward and tried to snatch the phone from her hand. "You're not calling anyone. This will ruin the family's reputation. We'll handle this at home. Call a private doctor." Maria held the phone tightly, pulling it away from Richard. "Your father is dying. We don't have time for reputations." And she dialed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. A female voice answered on the other end. 911, what's your emergency?" Maria replied with a trembling but clear voice. "An elderly man has been bitten by a venomous snake. We need help urgently in Buckhead, at the Montgomery mansion." She gave the full address, described the symptoms, and asked them to come quickly. The operator said an ambulance was on its way, 15 minutes at most. Richard stood frozen in the middle of the room, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of defeat. Lydia started to cry, but it wasn't a cry of concern for her father-in-law. It was a cry of fear of the scandal, the police, the public shame. Carla was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, sobbing with her hands over her face. Maria went back to Arthur, took his cold, trembling hand, and murmured softly, just for him to hear, "You're going to be okay. God doesn't let evil win." Arthur squeezed her hand, weakly, but with gratitude. His tired blue eyes met her dark ones, and in an almost inaudible whisper he said, "Thank you, Maria Sanchez. Thank you for not giving up on me." She didn't answer with words. She just kissed his sweaty forehead and stayed there, holding his hand, waiting for help to arrive. She knew this could be her last night in that house. She knew that by dialing that number, by defying Richard, by exposing the truth, she had chosen a path of no return. But looking at Arthur, seeing his difficult but still present breaths, seeing the trust in his eyes, Maria knew she had made the right choice, and she was willing to pay the price. Any price. The day dawned with sirens slicing through the silence of Buckhead, a sound the residents of that affluent neighborhood were not used to hearing. The ambulance had arrived shortly after midnight, with red and blue lights flashing and reflecting in the windows of the neighboring houses. The neighbors woke up, turned on their lights, and some came out onto their balconies in robes to see what was happening. Gossip in a wealthy neighborhood spreads quickly, even in the middle of the night. The ambulance rushed Arthur away, with an oxygen mask on his face and an IV in his arm, to Grady Memorial Hospital, the same hospital where Betty's brother, Sebastian, worked as an emergency room nurse. The initial report, made in the ambulance by the paramedic, spoke of envenomation by a snake bite, likely from a pit viper. The marks on his body, 2 small but deep punctures just above his right ankle, the swelling, that was rapidly climbing his leg, and the time between the bite and the emergency response would be crucial in determining if Arthur would survive. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Richard tried to control the narrative with the desperation of someone watching the ground crumble beneath their feet. As soon as the ambulance left, he gathered everyone in the living room, Maria, Carla, Betty, who had woken up from the noise, Mr. Neville, who had come up from the gatehouse to see what was happening, Frank, who slept in the small room out back, and Lydia still in her nightgown sitting on the sofa with a trembling hand holding a glass of whiskey. Richard paced back and forth, running a hand through his disheveled hair, his voice coming out overly controlled, rehearsed. "Look, you all saw what happened. It was an accident. The house is near a wooded area. Animals have gotten in before. Maria got scared, thought it was intentional, but it wasn't. That's all." He looked at each of them, trying to read their expressions. "And I hope we all have enough common sense not to spread rumors that will tarnish this family's name. Understood?" No one answered. Maria felt anger rise in her throat, hot and bitter. "Accidents don't come in pet shop boxes with your name on them," she said, her voice low but firm. "And accidents don't just happen when the window is left open and the medications are switched." Richard turned to her with narrowed, threatening eyes. "You're fired. Get your things and get out of here now." "I'm not going anywhere," Maria replied, crossing her arms. "Not before I talk to the police." That's when the landline in the living room rang. Richard answered, still trying to maintain his composure. On the other end of the line was the voice of a doctor from Grady Memorial. Arthur was in serious but stable condition. They had administered the antivenom in time, but due to the nature of the incident, a snake bite in a domestic environment, an elderly victim, the hospital was obligated to notify the authorities. The police would be informed. Richard slammed the phone down and stood there staring at the wall. Lydia started crying again, a shrill, theatrical cry. "We're going to jail. We're going to be arrested for this." Carla was huddled in an armchair, biting her nails, her face as pale as paper. The facts began to align against Richard like dominoes falling in sequence. Mr. Neville, pressured by his own conscience, and perhaps also by the fear of being considered an accomplice, revealed what he had been holding back. He had noted, as he always did, the entry of an unknown car at the mansion 2 weeks earlier. A silver pickup truck with a pet shop sticker on the side door. A man in his 40s, with a shaved head and a long-sleeved shirt despite the heat, had gotten out of the car carrying 2 cardboard boxes with holes. He had asked where the back garden was and spent about 20 minutes there talking with Frank. Neville hadn't thought much of it at the time, assuming he was some supplier of plants or fertilizer, but now, putting the pieces together, the scene took on a different meaning. He showed his little black notebook where he wrote everything down. Date, time, license plate, visitor's description, all recorded in the neat handwriting of someone who had learned to be meticulous from years of working in construction. The security cameras, which had been under maintenance for weeks, started working again after a technician, hastily called the next morning, found only a manually disconnected wire in the central system. The technician, a serious man in his 50s with a security company ID badge hanging around his neck, wrote up a full technical report. Someone had deliberately turned off the cameras by unplugging the power cable to the hard drive that recorded the images. The previous footage had been erased, but the technician's report proved the intentional interference. This wasn't an equipment failure, he told Maria and Neville, who were watching him work. Someone unplugged this by hand, knowing exactly what they were doing. At the hospital, Sebastian, Betty's brother, was on duty when Arthur was admitted. He recognized the name of the mansion where his sister worked and went to check. He found Arthur sedated, intubated, connected to machines that monitored every heartbeat, every breath. His right leg was bandaged. The swelling had been contained, but the bite mark was clear. Sebastian, who knew Maria from the stories his sister told, called her on the number Betty gave him. He asked her to bring the pills she had saved, the ones that seemed different from the prescription. Maria went to the hospital that same morning, carrying the 2 pills wrapped in a paper towel that she had kept in her apron pocket days before. Sebastian analyzed the pills discreetly, out of uniform, without causing a fuss. He compared them with Arthur's medical prescription attached to his hospital chart. He took photos of the pills, noted their color, shape, and markings. Then, using contacts he had in the hospital's pharmacy department, he managed to identify what they were. One of the pills, which should have been captopril for high blood pressure, was actually a strong anxiolytic used to sedate patients with panic attacks. The other, which should have been omeprazole for his stomach, was an anticoagulant that in the wrong doses could cause internal bleeding. Someone had been systematically switching Arthur's medications, making him more confused, drowsier, more vulnerable. Sebastian kept the samples, wrote everything down in an informal report, and with this information discreetly contacted the hospital's social services, who in turn alerted the police. Richard's teenage granddaughter, Laura, 16 years old, with purple-dyed hair, always with her phone in hand recording videos for TikTok and Instagram, had been an unwitting witness to something crucial. The night before everything happened, she was in the second floor, hallway, hiding at the top of the stairs, recording a video of herself lip-syncing to a song. That's when she heard the argument. Richard and Carla talking quietly but urgently in the office at the end of the hall. Laura, curious, lowered the volume of the music and left her phone recording, even though she wasn't in the frame. It captured Richard's voice, clear and unmistakable. "Tonight, he learns not to mess with the company papers anymore. After this, he'll sign whatever I want. Trust me, Carla, I know what I'm doing." And Carla's voice, hesitant, almost crying, "But what? If it goes wrong, what if he gets really hurt?" And Richard, impatient, "It won't go wrong, it's just a scare. A snake won't kill if you give the antivenom quickly. Relax." Laura hadn't really understood at the time. She thought it was strange, but didn't pay much attention. She saved the video on her phone and went to sleep. But the next day, when she saw the ambulance, when she heard her mother crying, when she learned that her grandfather had been bitten by a snake in his own room, she remembered. And she also remembered a conversation she'd had with Maria a few days earlier in the kitchen, while eating a cake Betty had made. Maria had asked her in a casual but serious way, "Laura, if you hear anything strange, anything that seems wrong, you save it, okay? Record it, write it down, don't let it get lost, it could be important." Laura had agreed, thinking it was just the housekeeper's paranoia, but now she understood. She took out her phone, found the video, and went to find Maria. She found her in the hospital cafeteria, drinking watery coffee from a machine, waiting for news about Arthur. She showed her the video. Maria listened once, twice, 3 times, feeling tears burn in her eyes. It was the proof that it wasn't an accident, that it had been planned. "You need to show this to the police," Maria said, holding the girl's hands. "But he's my dad," Laura whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "If I show them this, he'll go to jail." Maria took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I know it's hard, but your grandfather almost died, and if you don't show them, other people could get hurt. Doing the right thing isn't always easy, Laura. But it's what we have to do when we truly love someone." Laura cried, but she nodded. She put her phone away and promised she would hand over the video when the police arrived. Faced with all the evidence, the rosewood box with the pet shop sticker, the receipts found in the trash describing the purchase of a venomous snake, the switched medications confirmed by Sebastian's analysis, Neville's log of the pickup truck's entry, the technical report of the deliberately disabled cameras, and now Laura's video with the recorded confession, Richard reacted exactly like the cornered man he was. First, he tried to blame the gardener, Frank, saying it had been his idea, that he had only paid for the animal but didn't know Frank would put it in his father's room. Frank, terrified, denied everything, crying, saying that Richard had promised to pay him $5,000 if he helped, that he had threatened to fire him and his whole family if he didn't obey. Then, Richard tried to blame Carla, claiming he never wanted to hurt his father, only to scare him into being more docile, easier to convince. That Carla had exaggerated, had opened the window at the wrong time, had put the snake too close. "I never wanted him to actually get bitten," Richard shouted when the police arrived at the mansion the next afternoon. "It was just to scare him." Carla, afraid of prison, afraid of losing her son, afraid of everything, started talking. She told them everything: the $5,000 Richard offered, the detailed instructions: switch the medications gradually, leave the bedroom window open on specific nights, leave early on Friday so no one would be around. She said that Richard had assured her the snake wasn't that venomous, that it was just to give him a scare, that she believed him because she wanted to believe him, because she desperately needed that money. She spoke through tears, her hands trembling, begging for forgiveness, saying she never imagined it would come to this. Maria was called to give a statement at the police station late that afternoon. The sun was already setting when she entered the small, cold room, with peeling light green walls and an old formica table in the middle. An investigator in his 50s, bald, in a dress shirt and a loose tie, asked her to sit down and tell him everything from the beginning. Maria was trembling, not from fear of the police this time, but from fear of not being believed, fear that it would all be in vain, fear that Richard, with his expensive lawyers, would find a way to get out of it unscathed. She remembered the night no one believed her years ago, when she reported her violent stepfather. She remembered the social worker who filed the case away. She remembered the feeling of helplessness, of having no voice, of being invisible. But this time was different. This time she had proof. She had the notebook with her notes. She had the receipts. She had the testimonies of Betty, Neville, and Sebastian. She had Laura's video. She had Carla's confession. She was not alone. Before entering the interview room, she paused for a moment in the station's hallway. She took the old rosary from her pocket, touched the worn plastic beads, and kissed the small metal cross. She took 3 deep breaths, trying to calm her heart. She thought of Arthur, of Mrs. Rosa, of everything she had been through to get to this point. And she murmured softly, just for God and herself, "Help me to speak the truth clearly. Help me not to forget anything. Help me to be heard." She entered the room, sat in the hard plastic chair, and began to tell her story. From the first strange stain on the sheet to the night she saved Arthur. She spoke for almost 2 hours. The investigator wrote everything down, asked questions, requested details, and he believed her. For the first time in her life, Maria felt that her voice mattered, that her word had value, that she was not invisible. Months passed before the consequences took final shape, before justice, slow as it always is, finally reached the end of the road. The legal proceedings against Richard dragged through the system like a turtle climbing a hill, with postponed hearings, filed appeals, and expensive lawyers arguing technicalities Maria didn't even know existed. But in the end, the facts were too undeniable, the evidence too solid, and even the best lawyers couldn't turn attempted murder into a domestic accident. Richard was convicted of aggravated attempted murder and crime against the elderly, 2 serious offenses that the law does not easily forgive. But thanks to his lawyers, the late-stage remorse he showed at the hearing, crying and begging his father for forgiveness in front of the judge, and the fact that he was a first-time offender with a fixed address, he did not go directly to prison. Instead, he served under precautionary measures, mandatory removal from the company's management, which was taken over by an independent administrative board, a restraining order preventing any contact with his father for an indefinite period, the use of an electronic ankle monitor, and community service at a nursing home in the Sweet Auburn neighborhood, precisely the shelter Arthur had dreamed of building and which now, by an irony that escaped no one, would be renovated with part of the money from the sale of the shares. Every Saturday morning, Richard had to report to the shelter, put on a simple apron, and help serve breakfast, change sheets, and keep the elderly residents company. The old ladies at the shelter didn't know who he really was, only that he was that man who's doing community service. Some liked him, thought he had polite manners, hands too delicate for manual labor. Others were suspicious, saying he had an empty look in his eyes like someone who was there, in body but not in spirit. The shelter's coordinator, Mrs. Myrtle, a black woman with white hair and glasses, had no pity for him. She demanded punctuality, demanded effort, and when Richard complained about a task, she would simply say, "Mister, the old folks here didn't choose to be in this situation. You chose yours, so stop complaining and go wash that bathroom." Carla, after cooperating with the investigation and providing details only she knew, had her criminal proceedings suspended on the condition of psychological treatment and a 2-year ban from working as a private nurse. She temporarily lost her license, which meant losing the higher income she had been earning. She started working at a low-cost clinic in a working-class neighborhood, earning less than half of what she made before, under the strict supervision of a head nurse who accepted no mistakes or excuses. Every day upon returning home, Carla would look at her son, Raphael, and feel the weight of shame. She had explained to him what had happened, without lying, without sugarcoating it. The boy, at 15, with a look too serious for his age, listened to everything in silence. He didn't shout, he didn't cry. He just said, "We're going to have to change schools, right, Mum?" Carla nodded, swallowing her tears. She enrolled him in a good public school, and Raphael, far from complaining, began to study even harder, as if he wanted to prove that his mother's wrong choice would not define his future. Frank, the gardener, was fired immediately. He did not face charges because it was proven that he had acted under duress and threat, receiving promises of money that were never fulfilled and threats of dismissal that left him no choice. Still, the guilt haunted him. He spent weeks looking for a job in other neighborhoods, far from that kind of people, far from that kind of offer. When he finally got a position on a farm in a rural county, tending to an organic garden for a simple family, he told his new boss everything during the interview. He talked about the snake, the money offered, the fear he felt. The boss, an old man with white hair and dirt-caked hands, listened to everything and then just said, "Son, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do afterward. You want to work honestly now?" Frank nodded, his eyes welling. "Up. Then you're hired. But here, if I catch you doing anything crooked, you're out on the spot. Deal?" Frank agreed, and from that day forward, he worked like he had never worked before, as if every head of lettuce he planted was a silent apology. Arthur, after a slow and painful recovery at Grady Memorial, nearly 3 weeks of hospitalization, physical therapy for the leg that remained weak after the bite, and psychological counseling to deal with the trauma of almost being killed by his own son, made an irrevocable decision. He would never return to the mansion in Buckhead. He no longer wanted to live in that house full of bad memories, in that place where he almost died, where he was betrayed by those who should have protected him. With the help of an honest lawyer recommended by Sebastian, Betty's brother, he chose to settle in a smaller, simpler, more human house. He found a house in Decatur, in a quiet neighborhood, a single-story house with 3 bedrooms, a small garden in the front, and a backyard where he could plant some fruit trees. His room was bright, with a large window overlooking the garden, a white sheer curtain that let the morning sun in, and a wooden nightstand where he placed the rosary Maria had given him, a new rosary with blue beads, bought with her first paycheck as a registered employee. Because Maria was no longer just a housekeeper, she was the coordinator of the household routines and Arthur's trusted caregiver, with a formal contract, a salary of $2,500 a month, vacation, benefits, and respect. Arthur made sure to register everything properly, with a contract signed and notarized and legally guaranteed benefits. "You saved my life, Maria," he said the day he signed her employment papers, "and now I'm going to make sure you have what I should have given you from the beginning, dignity." Maria cried so much she wet the contract, and they had to print another one. The routine in the new house was simple and good. Maria arrived at 7 in the morning, prepared Arthur's breakfast, warm French bread from the corner bakery, fresh cheese, sliced papaya, strong brewed coffee, and had breakfast with him at the kitchen table, talking about the day, the news in the paper, and her mother, who was now doing better with her diabetes and came to visit from time to time. Afterward, she would help Arthur with his physical therapy at home, the exercises the doctor had prescribed to strengthen his leg. In the afternoon, she took care of the house, but without the desperate rush of before. She cleaned calmly, cooked lunch, watered the garden plants. And she talked. She talked a lot with Arthur, who liked to tell stories from his youth, from when he started the company with a rented warehouse and an old truck. Maria listened to everything, fascinated, and sometimes told her own stories of her childhood in Clayton County, of the hardships, of the small joys. The rosary that once hid in Maria's apron pocket now rested on the nightstand in Arthur's room, a silent reminder of the night everything changed. Every morning before breakfast, Arthur would take the rosary and say 3 Hail Marys and an Our Father as Maria had taught him. He said he had never been very religious, but after everything he had been through, he needed to give thanks. "God used you to save me, Maria," he would say. "So now, I pray to thank him for your existence." The old rosewood box, the very one that had served as a makeshift prison for the snake, and later as evidence in the trial, was returned to Arthur after the case was closed. He never wanted to store documents in it again. Instead, he gave the box to Maria and suggested, "Turn it into something beautiful, something that represents a new beginning." Maria took the box to her mother's house, sanded it carefully, painted the inside white, drilled holes in the bottom for drainage, and turned it into a planter. She planted purple violets in it, those small, delicate flowers that like the shade. She placed the planter on the porch of Arthur's house, where the flowers bloomed every morning, a reminder that something beautiful can be born, even from the worst situations. Arthur finally managed to register the foundation he had always dreamed of. With the sale of 20% of the company's shares, as planned from the beginning, he raised enough money to create the Arthur Montgomery Charitable Foundation, focusing on the education of low-income youth and the renovation of the Sweet Auburn nursing home. He adjusted his will legally and transparently, with witnesses and trusted lawyers, ensuring the money would be used to help people who truly needed it. The foundation's first action was to completely renovate the shelter where Richard was serving his community service. They painted the walls, replaced the mattresses, installed air conditioning in the rooms, and hired more caregivers. The old ladies who lived there couldn't believe the transformation. Mrs. Myrtle, the coordinator, cried with joy on the day of the reopening, hugged Arthur tightly and said, "You're an angel, Mr. Arthur. A real angel." Betty, who continued to work as a cook but now with reduced hours and a better salary, provided cakes and pastries for the foundation's events. Cornbread cake, orange cake, warm cheese bread that disappeared in 5 minutes. She loved to participate, loved seeing the smiles on people's faces as they ate her recipes, loved knowing that her food was part of something bigger. Sebastian, her nurse brother, became a volunteer for the foundation, giving talks on elderly health in underserved communities, teaching families how to better care for their elders at home. Mr. Neville, now retired from his doorman duties, would sometimes stop by Arthur's house for coffee and to tell stories. He would bring his little black notebook where he wrote everything down, show Arthur the old entries, and the two would laugh remembering funny incidents from the mansion. "I knew something was wrong, Mr. Arthur," Neville would say, shaking his head, "but I never imagined it was that serious." Arthur always thanked him, saying that Neville's attention to detail had been crucial in proving the truth. Laura, the granddaughter, visited her grandfather frequently, usually on Sundays, bringing books she thought he would like and showing him music videos on her phone. Their relationship had grown closer after everything. Laura felt guilty for being Richard's daughter, but Arthur always told her, "You are not responsible for your father's choices. You are responsible for yours. And you chose to do the right thing, that's what matters." The girl would cry, hug her grandfather, and promise never to disappoint him. She also started volunteering at the foundation, helping to organize donations of clothes and toys. Maria still bore the marks of exhaustion. Her face had lines that weren't there before, her right shoulder ached on rainy days, and her hands were rougher from so much work. But they were different marks now. They were not marks of humiliation and invisibility. They were marks of struggle and victory. She walked differently, with her spine straighter, her gaze firmer. She walked with the certainty of belonging in that place, of having earned that space, not out of pity or favor, but through courage and insistence. Every difficult choice she had made, the decision not to stay silent, to note the evidence, to confront Lydia, to dial 911 even with Richard shouting, to give her statement at the police station even while trembling with fear. Every one of those choices had been worth it. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, with the sky painted orange and purple as the sun set behind the hills, Maria was watering the violets in the planter box on the porch. Arthur was sitting in the rocking chair beside her, reading the newspaper and commenting on the news. Mrs. Rosa, Maria's mother, had come for lunch and was now napping on the living room sofa. Maria's younger brother, Junior, who was studying to be a nursing assistant at night, had stopped by in the morning to borrow some money from her to buy his textbooks. Everything was peaceful. Everything was right. Maria looked at the reddish sky, felt the cool afternoon breeze on her face, and thought about everything she had been through to get here. She thought of the 9-year-old girl who reported her stepfather and was not heard. She thought of the young woman who had worked for years being invisible, cleaning the toilets of people who didn't even know her full name. She thought of the night she almost gave up when she was accused of stealing the bracelet. She thought of the snake, the fear, the courage she found in a place so deep she didn't know it existed. And she thought of God, who took his time but did not forget. She touched the rosary she now wore around her neck over her blouse, no longer hiding it. She closed her eyes, smelled the scent of the violets mixed with the aroma of coffee coming from the kitchen, and murmured softly, needing nothing more, her voice firm and full of gratitude. The truth takes time, but it arrives, because God doesn't forget those who don't give up. Arthur, who heard her, lowered his newspaper and looked at her with those tired but affectionate blue eyes. Amen, Maria Sanchez. Amen. And the two of them sat there, on the porch of the simple house, in Decatur, watching the afternoon turn into night, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky, knowing they had won. Not because they were strong, not because they were rich or powerful, but because they chose, against all odds, to do what was right. And in the end, doing the right thing is always worth it. Always.